Hello and welcome to 7-Bit Pixel Tutorials, where we take some of the tools and techniques and some of your favourite online trends. I'm Taylor and today we are looking at some fake out-of-home content. So you might have seen online, new Look and Northface have been putting clothing on some famous landmarks, especially around the UK. And the Berry VFX house in the UK has done some amazing stuff, most recently on top of the O2. And today we have collaborated with 2B Media to make some Christmas content. So, we'll be looking at how to make our own fake out-of-home stuff using our own Christmas hat that we will build using a cloth simulation, and we'll also learn how to put it in place using the Camera Calibration Tag as it's a static shot. So, without further ado, let's get into it! Okay, so we're coming to a new Cinema 4D project and we want to bring our footage in to be able to camera calibrate it. So I know that my footage is 25 frames a second, so as always we go down to our project attributes and we're going to change this to 25 frames. Then what we want to do is just go into our render and we want to make sure that this is set to 25 frames also. We can change these other settings once we've got our footage in and we know what we're looking at. So what I want to do now is get a new camera. I'll be using Redshift for this, so let's get our camera and let's look through the camera. So as you can see, nothing is there. Why would there be? We haven't put anything in the scene. So let's do that. So we go up to our Redshift camera and we right click that and we go down to tracker tags and we go camera calibrator. Down in our attribute window, we get a bunch of new settings and tabs that we can have a look at. So let's go straight into image and let's load our image. So what I've done here is I've already pre-rendered a sequence from the footage given to us by 2B Media. All I've done is taken this into After Effects and rendered it out as a TIFF sequence. I'm not sure if it's entirely the case anymore that Cinema 4D needs a picture sequence to run better. However, that's where we are. The only reason I ran the sequence out is because initially I was going to 3D track it. And where it is a static shot, I should be able to get away with using the camera calibrator. So, we make sure that everything is correct. Yes, it is a 16:9 shot. So image scale lets us change the scale of the image, and that will be helpful for when we have to line up the ground plane later on. Right click on that, resets it to default. Image offset X and Y, as you can imagine, just offsets the image in either direction. And brightness allows it to go darker or brighter depending on what you're trying to focus on, allowing you to get a better calibration. And obviously if we go full image, so if we just change all these to random values and we click full image, it kind of resets it back to default so we can always have it in front of us. What do we do and where do we go from here? So if we go into calibrate, as you can see, we've got a bunch of red boxes and that's quite alarming to look at straight away, but that's absolutely fine. There are traffic lights, very much like the traffic light system up here, where you'll be able to view things on and off in your viewport and render. This is a traffic light system to let us know the camera calibration is working. So let's go add line, and as you can see, it puts one right in the center for us. So if we grab this, you can see that we have a little box here, a little magnified box, and that lets us make sure that we can properly pinpoint where we want things to be. So I'm going to put a point there, just on the edge here. And I'm going to put another point just on the edge here. So this, for me, is going to be my X point. X is horizontal, Y is vertical, and Z is depth. So I want this to be my X. So I'm going to shift click and turn it into a red line. That lets the camera calibration know that this is starting to be my X. As you can see, we haven't got much here because it's only working from the X. So let's add a new line. And let's work on our Z plane. So I'm going to put a point down here. And I'm going to put a point here, just matching up with the X. And I'm going to shift click on that until it goes into a blue line. So now we have a depth vanishing point. I'm going to add one more line. And I'm going to use a point up here where it's a little bit easier to see. And this is going to be my Y axis. Because for me, this is up and down. So turn that into a green one, shift double click. So we're starting to get some changes over here. We've got a Y line okay, and we're starting to get some unsolved insufficient lines. So let's add a few more lines. So we're going to get a line here, and we're just going to add this line over here, this line here. And as we know, this is our Z line. So shift 3 clicks, and we're starting to get our Z vanishing line there. We're just going to add a few more. Again, we're just going to go up to these points that we can see very nicely. for our Y. Shift double click. And we're just going to get one more X, just so that we know what we're looking at. So you can already see in the bottom right hand corner here, we're getting a lot of yellow solved, some green for the camera. That's looking great, but as you can see, we have these 3 dashes. That is data that we want to be filling. So let's see if we can fill that data. So we go to add grid. We've got a grid here, and let's just use this front wall as our plane here. So we can see what we're looking at. And this grid will just give it a lot more data and try and work out what it is doing and where it's going. This is on our red, our x-axis, so shift click. And already, look at that, we're getting a solve of 0.22 in our X vanishing point. So let's see if we can just tidy this up a little bit. So we're going to add a new line, and we're going to just put some more on this front wall here because it gives us a lot of opportunity. So make sure that is blue. And already it started to turn blue before I even clicked it. And we've got solve in that X of 0.001. Incredible. And we just want one more line because we're missing that Y point. So again, we're just going to use this bit here. I'm just going to line it all up. And we turn that green. So already we got some amazing numbers here. It's below 0.0 of a pixel solved. Everything's looking great. How do we move on from here? So now we need to try and add our plane in. So if we go back to image and we drop our scale to something like 90%, we're able to go back into calibrate, grab a pin, and let's try and find our flaw. So I'm just going to grab this pin and I'm just going to kind of put it here. So what I'm looking at is in this corner here, I'm looking at these lines and seeing where they match up here. And I'm trying to get the ground position kind of where I want it to be. See, that's too high because, yeah, that one's sitting here, but this one's sitting just above over here. So we're kind of sitting in the middle as where this point is. So if we bring this point back down, that's starting to look a lot better to me. So we go back to image, full image, and then we can go create background and create mapping tag. So not much has changed. All we've done is be left in the exact same position that we were. Brilliant. So let's come out of the camera view. And you're not going to be able to see much difference because we've got the background object on. So if we just switch that off for a second, as you can see, not much has actually happened here. You know, all we've got is a camera position, but we also have our data and how that camera is aligned. We go back into our camera and we turn our background layer on. We're starting to see that these lines are exactly kind of where we want them to be. So now we can start blocking out the scene. So if we go up to here to primitives and we bring a plane in, and let's just change that plane to a +Z. Let's drop this down to say 10 centimeters either way. And segments of 1. Now if we move this across, as you can see, that fits perfectly on that kind of bit of concrete curb there. Now we're able to block out the rest of our scene. So if we bring this up and we sit it on the bottom here of what we want, we can then bring this back until this aligns with this line here. That's looking great to me. We could probably go back a little bit further, but that's looking great. That goes all the way now. So if we press C, and if we look on the icon up here, as we hit C, it turns it into an actual polygon object. So now this is editable. We go into edge select here, and we're just going to start moving our edges about. And this is starting to allow us, as you can see, to start blocking out the scene. If we go back over to this edge here, and we hold Control or Command, and click that Z arrow here for depth, we can drag that back out, and we can start getting actual layout and blocking of our scene. We come out of camera, as you can see, turn off the background object just to make it a little bit more visible. As you can see, we're starting to get that plinth that the statue was sitting on. So let's continue blocking this out. So now we need kind of the next section here. So what I want to do is perhaps grab a cube, and obviously the cube is now sitting in the camera. So let's drop this back down to the 10 centimeter default that we was using. And let's try and once again position this as and where we need. So that is already looking really great. You can see those lines are kind of fairly matching there. Cool, so now we've got that, we now need to kind of block out the rest of that plinth, just so we can get a visual cue on where that head positioning is. So now we've got this, let's go to our faces and press C on the cube, turn that into a polygon object as well, editable, and let's grab our back face and let's start dragging it back and go back into our camera view. And now we can see just how far we have to pull that back. Come back out, and we want to select the side, go back into our camera view, and again, let's just pull that back out. So as you can see, we're starting to get an actual plinth. We've got the staircase in place. Where do we go from here? Now we know roughly that the head is sitting nearer the front of this cube. So we're going to bring in a sphere, and we're going to knock this back down to the 10 centimeter size that we was using. And we're going to go to Object, and we're going to click this button here. This button here is called Place. Now I like using this button a lot. It makes things a lot easier trying to get things in position. So if we click on it, we can now click anywhere in our scene. And the sphere will start being placed along any of the axes that I'm trying to put this on. Which is brilliant, because now we can look at this and we can try and actually position the sphere into a front center position. We can even go to our top view here and see if we can get it a little bit more accurate. So now we're happy with that, we can go back into our camera and we can go back into our standard transformation tools, and we can actually just try and get this into a position that we're happy with. And there's our head geometry. That is what the hat is going to be sitting on. So now we've got the scene blocked out and we've got our kind of fake head in place. What do we do from here? So what we do is that we need to build out the rest of the body. What I did, because I'm not that best of modeling, however, all I need is collision data, is I just control or command click and drag the sphere out quite a few times and started trying to match the basics of his body. So as you can see, his body is made up of a lot of spherical edges and curves. This allows me to go in with the sphere and try and match up the sphere to the rest of his body, just to build some collision data. And then because we want to make sure that there's a sphere touching the center to the head, let's bring this out and bring it across. And we don't want to get too much in the way of the other bits, but there we go. So now these spheres are touching. But now we need them to actually just not be a bunch of spheres. That just looks ridiculous. So this is something I did. I've got all these spheres and I right clicked and I connected them to object. And that gives me one single object. So now I can just get rid of these if I want to. However, I don't do that. I just hide them. So we call it hide sphere. Turn that off. So then we've got our big sphere, and as you can see, they're all selected as one object, as you can see from the outline. So what Cinema 4D can do, we can use a volume builder. So we can go into here, and if we hold Alt, it will automatically put the item that we had selected into the new one. So because we had sphere 6 selected, we alt click volume builder, it goes into volume builder. So what volume builder does is that it takes the object that we're doing and it brings them down into basic voxels. This allows us to build kind of different smoke simulations or VDBs or a whole manner of stuff, including additional collision data. We're going to just knock this down to, let's say, 1.5 centimeters. And as you can see, the higher the voxel size, the bigger the data. The smaller the voxel size, the more data we get. So we don't want to go too small because we don't want too much data. but at the same time we want enough and we want it to be less jaggedy than that. So let's drop it down to 1. We can also add a SDF smooth on there. And as you can see, it brings it down, but that's a lot. So we're just going to bring the strength back up to maybe something like 35, just so that we know the head is covered. And then we're going to go back into here, and with our Alt again, we're going to go into Volume Mesher. And as you can see, what this does is that it actually meshes what we had as voxels back into its own form of geometry data. So if we press N, and what N does, it brings up a bunch of visual hotkeys. So you have Gouraud shading, quick shading, and we can just press N and G, for example, and turn everything into lines. And as you can see, we've got a lot of data up here, but we just want that to look a bit nicer, because when it comes to collisions, there's going to be a lot of faces all over the place. In Cinema 4D, they have the ZBrush Remesher. So we click on this icon here, and we go down to Remesh. Alt click. And so, because this is all procedural, all this is now going from Sphere to Volume Builder to Volume Mesher to Remesh. And as you can see immediately with the Remesh, if we turn this on and off, you can see what an amazing job that's done of just cleaning up that data, that geometry there. So what I want to do, I want to go back into Volume Builder. I want to go back into the Object tab, and I just kind of want to turn off the SDF Smooth. Because as you can see with the Remesher, we don't need to lose as much data, and it also smooths it all out for us, which is brilliant. So now we've got that, we can right click, connect objects. Because I don't like deleting things, we just hide everything. So now we only have our remesh data. Let's get to building our Santa hat. So let's build our Santa hat. So we're going to come up here and we're going to get cylinder. And this is going to be the base of our hat. We don't need to necessarily worry too much about the scales over here. However, it's always good to work to real life scale. But because we're putting a massive hat on a massive statue, let's not worry about it for now. So I'm just going to drop this down to about 50. And then we've got a nice kind of little hat thing. And I'm just going to drop the height because the Santa hat has that kind of little white bit at the bottom. Perfect. So now if I go to NB, I can look at my lines and I can see that there's not enough data on here because it's going all jaggedy. So I'm just going to knock up the rotation segments to 32. And that'll just give us a slightly smoother outing there. So what do I need to do from here? So now I need to build the actual point of the hat. So I'm going to go back up to my primitives and I'm going to get a cone. And that is so far a massive cone. But because we have our data still down here, we can try and match it. So we know our radius needs to be just below 50 centimeters. And that is because it needs to fit within inside the cylinder. So if we go into our bottom radius, and let's change that to 45. As you can see, that's still not right, and that's because our height is still 200 centimeters. So for now, let's drop that down to 50, just so it's manageable. And let's move this up a little bit. So, as you can see, that looks more like I guess an elf's hat more than anything else. So let's just increase that height again. And then we could just bring this up. So that's looking better already. Say for example, we're happy with that. What do we do next? So let's make sure that we have enough segments in there. So I'm just going to up the height segments to say 10. And that gives us more geometry for the cloth simulation to work with. Let's maybe go 20 just to be safe. And the rotation segments, again, I'm just going to go to 32 just to make sure it's nice and round. So what do we do from here? So let's color code things just so we know what we're looking at. So if we go into our materials tab and we double click, it opens up a new standard material. We're just going to change this to red and we're going to do the same thing again. And we're just going to change this to white and then we're just going to assign them appropriately. So now we have our hat. So what do we do from here? So if I'm happy with these, normally I would control click them and make duplicates, but let's say we're happy. Let's go in and click C and C and turn them into polygons. Then we go into cylinder and we go simulation tags, collider, because we want this hat to bounce off the side of this if it comes down and reacts with it. We go into cone, simulation, cloth. So now if we play with no other settings changed, it just falls down and then just slides off. We don't need to worry about anything too much in here, but we want to focus on the cone. So let's turn off the cylinder from viewport for the time being. If we go underneath and we go into our point selection here, and we go into our loop selection, we can select all these bottom points down here. Now for safekeeping, I always like to go into store selection, so I always have that available. But what I also want to do whilst I'm down here is right click, simulation, cloth belt. Now what this does is effectively allows you to pin certain points to another object. So using this method, we should be able to stop the hat sliding away from the cylinder. So if we drag the cylinder down here, and with all of our points selected on the outside, hit set, as you can see, they've gone bright yellow, which means that should have worked. So let's test it out. So let's bring our viewport back up to here, bring our cylinder back, and start the simulation again. Perfect. So now it's not sliding away anymore, but all it's done is just drop to one side. So let's try and work out what we need to do from here. So if we're happy with this, let's go to simulate, forces, and wind. What we're going to do is just going to try and to give it a bit of movement just so we can see what the cloth simulation looks like. So with this blue arrow here, obviously that's our Z axis, but that's also the way in which this is going to be blowing, because sometimes I can't normally see this arrow. So I always look for the blue arrow. The thing with wind data is that you need to crank it up far more than you ever expect you'd need to. So let's go to 500 centimeters in wind speed. We start the simulation again. And as you can see, we actually got a bit of movement there, but not too much because it's already falling down. So if we just tilt up our wind a little bit, maybe angle it a little, and let's whack up the wind settings to maybe 1000, we can start seeing that we're getting a bit more movement on there. So we can go into our thickness here and drop it down to say 1. We can also increase the target length. So what the target length does is basically determine whether the cloth can stretch or whether it restricts. So if we go up to 110%, it allows it for a 10% increase, which when we're looking for things blowing in the wind and we're looking for slightly kind of humorous or quirky animation regarding cloth, it can work really well for us. So if we just click play again, as you can see, it doesn't quite sink in because it's kind of somewhat stretching to begin with. So now we're kind of getting that kind of Santa hat look. If we're feeling happy with this, obviously we can change a lot of these other settings as well, but it depends on what scene you're doing. But if we're fairly happy with this, we can then just import all of this straight into our other project. So let's do that. I brought it into the project and I've grouped it into a null under Santa hat using Alt and G to put it into a group. Now it's in a group, I'm just going to go to object and I'm just going to scale this object all the way down. I am then going to use my place tool, which I talked about earlier, and look to place the Santa hat somewhere on the head of our statue. I might need to come out of the camera to get a slight better position. Whoop. So if we turn off our remesh, as you can see, with a little bit of playing there, it sits on the head quite nicely. It droops over the top. We need to add a collider to our remesh so that the hat bounces and sits gently on top of the head there. So if we come out of our camera, as you can see, that's working really nicely. That's exactly what we're looking for. So if we go into our cone, we go back to our start, let's go into here and we go subdivide with Alt selected. I'm just going to subdivide that just so we get a bit more data there, and then we're also just going to go into thicken, and we're just going to thicken it by 1 centimeter so that when it falls now we get something that just looks a little bit more animated, a little bit more brought to life, as it were. Even though we haven't got any trees blowing here, we want it to feel slightly more dynamic, so we're just going to cheat that a little bit and add our wind back in. So now we've got our wind, let's come out of our camera view and let's have a look at what's going on. So again, it's pointing to the back. So let's move it there and let's hold shift as we do our rotation. And that allows us to get an accurate rotation based on 5-degree intervals. So now we've got to go in that way. Let's go back into our wind. Let's turn it up to 1000 and let's just play back and see what happens. So as you can see, we're starting to get something that is actually reacting. So let's try and get our wind to kind of blow up a little bit. And let's look back through the camera. So that's looking a bit better. That feels like there's a bit of wind on the day and it's actually just reacting with the Santa hat. Obviously, this is all to taste and you can do what it is that you want to do from there. So let's turn off the wind for now, just so that we can't see it, but it's definitely there. So now we're happy with that and we're looking at how things are looking. What do we do from here? How do we go about things? Because that's not really a Santa hat. Santa hat has a little bobble on the end. So why didn't we add that bobble when we were doing the cone? And the reason being for that is that if we pause it around about here and we go look at our Santa hat. Ooh. You'd think I'd learn how to use the camera by now. If we look at our Santa hat, everything is kind of getting moved and squashed. And that's just not what we're looking at. We're not looking to do that because the bobble on the end would also go into the same cloth simulation. We want that to remain static and solid as you would do on a standard Santa hat. So how do we now add the little bobble at the end? Let's take a look at how we do this. What we need to do is that we go into our cloth simulation. We're going to go into cache and we're just going to cache the scene. And this will just calculate all the different bits that we got so far. So now as we play through, that's looking great. How do we get the bobble in the end? So if we click on this little diamond in the bottom left, that's our dope sheet. And the dope sheet allows you to have full control over animation in the timeline. If we click on the cone here and we go to functions and bake objects, and we're happy with our standard 75 frame range there, all parameters okay. Now we have keyframes. This is kind of exactly what we're looking for. So if we go back into our point data and we go back to the start and we go to our point selection, we're going to go to the top here and we're just going to select this very top point. If we zoom out a little bit, we can see more of it. We're going to select this very top point and we're going to go to select, store selection. So over here now we have a new selection. We have our original one, which are the bottom tags, and we have our other one, which is our top one. Why do we need these keyframes? Well, let me tell you. It's because now we can use a quick little cheap trick to attach a bobble on the other end. So let's add a cloner. And then inside the cloner, let's go to mode, object, and drag our cone into there. And then within the selection bit here, we can grab our selection and put it there. So no matter what we put in the cloner now, it will only spawn at the top of the bobble. So if we go to sphere and we make that sphere really small, so let's say 2 centimeters, and we drag that into our cloner, let's go to cloner and just change distribution to vertex. So now we're looking for it to only find the vertices on the object, which will be that point at the top, as we're now telling it to look only at that point. Okay, so if we hit play, as you can see, something's gone wrong. And what's that? It's because our point selections are called the same thing. They're both called point selection. So when the cloner looks at it, it's looking at this one first with our 32 points on it. That's not what we want. So we're going to go back into here and we're going to rename this point selection top of hat. So now when we go back into cloner, we can drag top of hat back into our selection. And because we've turned these into keyframes, it will now look for the next keyframe that our bobble needs to go to. And perfect, we now have a bobble on the end of our hat. So if we go back into our camera view and we hit play, we have our bobble on the end of our hat. If we go into our Redshift render view as well, let's have a quick look. There it is. Perfect. So Now we just need to light it, work out what AOVs and everything we need to do, bring it into our favorite compositor, and there we have it. We have our Christmas hat, fake out of home clothing on objects look. Thank you very much for watching.